Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be back.
Today, we're going to be looking at a really interesting case from Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah, this one's fascinating. It involves a historic property that's at the center of a legal battle.
A legal battle. Okay, so we've got court documents, legal agreements, correspondence. Uh, what exactly are we trying to figure out here?
Well, you know what makes this case really interesting is it kind of brings together community development and historic preservation with the legal system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like this three-way collision. And to understand it, we really need to understand what each player is thinking.
Okay, so let's break it down. Who are the players in this whole drama?
Okay, so at the heart of it, we've got Nicholas Miles. He's the owner of the property,
All right,
and he lives at 901 North Port Street in Baltimore.
got it. So Nicholas is our main character here. Who's he up against?
He's actually up against two plaintiffs. We have the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition. They're also known as HEBCAC.
HEBCAC, okay.
Yeah. And then we also have Eager Street Development, 28 LLC.
Eager Street Development. 2 against 1. Sounds like Nicholas might be in for a fight here.
Yeah, he could be. What's interesting is that both of the plaintiffs, HEBCAC and Eager Street Development, they're both located at the same address, 1212 North Wolf Street, also in Baltimore.
Huh. Interesting. So tell me a little bit more about these organizations. What do they do?
Well, they're both really major players in Baltimore's revitalization efforts. HEBCAC is a nonprofit, and they really focus on community development.
Right.
And then Eager Street Development, as the name kind of suggests, they specialize in, development projects.
So they both are really invested in improving Baltimore, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got our players. What about the property itself? What's so special about this property?
We're talking about a historic property in Baltimore. It was really in dire need of renovation when Nicholas Miles purchased it.
And he saw the potential in this property.
Absolutely. He saw a diamond in the rough, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
and he paid $214,625 for it.
Wow. So this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. In April 2017, Miles entered into a historic tax credit agreement.
Yes, he did.
Can you explain for our listeners what that is?
Sure. So a historic tax credit agreement, or an HTC agreement, is essentially a way to incentivize people to invest in restoring historic buildings.
Okay.
So these historic tax credits, or HTCs, are basically valuable tax breaks that help to cover the cost of these renovations.
This is like getting rewarded for preserving history.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's really a win-win situation because developers get this financial help, and then we all get to enjoy these beautiful historic buildings.
Yeah, they contribute so much to our communities, these old buildings.
They really do.
So where do HEBCAC and Eager Street Development fit into all of this?
So they were essentially the supporting cast in this whole endeavor. They agreed to help Miles navigate the really complex process of applying for these HTCs. And they even provided some funding for the project.
Oh, wow. So they were really his partners in this whole restoration journey.
Yeah, you could say that.
So it sounds like a pretty good deal for Nicholas. But I'm guessing there's a catch.
There is a catch. There's always a catch, right?
Always a catch.
Buried in this agreement was what is called a default clause.
Okay.
And basically it stated that if Miles didn't pay the plaintiffs the full amount of the HTC proceeds that he received within 15 days, he would be considered in default.
15 days. That seems like a pretty tight window.
Yeah, it does seem pretty strict. These clauses are pretty standard, though, in these types of agreements. We're talking about really substantial financial investment. And HEBCAC and Eager Street Development probably put a lot of time and resources into this project.
They want to make sure that they get paid for their work and their time.
Exactly. They want to protect their interests and ensure that everyone's fulfilling their end of the bargain.
That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so did Miles get these tax credits?
He did. He got them in the spring of 2018, and he received $36,394 in HTC proceeds.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty good chunk of change. So this is where I'm assuming things start to fall apart.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
So according to the lawsuit, he decided not to follow through on his end of the agreement.
So he got the money, but he didn't pay the people that helped him get it.
That's what the lawsuit says.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the million-dollar question right now.
Right. What was he thinking? And we don't know the answer yet.
Not from these documents. We're missing his perspective.
Okay, so what did HEBCAC and Eager Street Development do when he didn't pay up? I'm assuming they weren't too happy.
No, not at all. And, they initially tried to be reasonable about it. They sent payment requests in September and October of 2018.
Okay.
But Miles didn't respond. They even tried mediation in February 2019.
So they tried to resolve this outside of the courtroom.
Yeah, they did. They tried to find a solution that worked for everybody, but it just didn't work.
So he wasn't budging.
Nope. And after months of unanswered requests and the failed mediation, the plaintiffs finally decided to take legal action.
So in March 2019, they filed the lawsuit.
That's right.
And that brings us to the documents that we have in front of us. So what are the main arguments that they're making against Miles in this lawsuit?
Well, their main argument is breach of contract.
Okay.
Basically, they're saying that Miles broke their agreement by failing to hand over those HTC proceeds that he received.
And they're not just asking for the $36,000 back, right? I'm assuming they're asking for more than that?
Oh, yeah. They're also demanding interest on that unpaid amount.
Right.
And all those legal fees, which, as we know, can add up really quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So breach of contract, that's their main strategy. Do they have any other arguments in this lawsuit?
They do. And this one's a little bit more complex. They're also arguing something called unjust enrichment.
Unjust enrichment. What does that mean?
Okay, so imagine you help a friend bake a cake for a competition.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And they win. They get a big prize. But then they refuse to share the prize with you, even though you helped to make that cake.
That's not a good friend.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what unjust enrichment is all about. It means that one party is benefiting unfairly at the expense of another party.
So in this case, the plaintiffs are saying that they did all this work to help Miles get those tax credits, and now he's unfairly profiting by keeping all the money for himself.
Exactly. They argue that they provided valuable services, they helped with the renovation, the sale of the property, and the HTC application process, and Miles received these financial rewards, but didn't hold up his end of the bargain.
So basically they're saying he can't just take all the benefits without compensating them for all of their work.
That's what they're saying.
I can understand that argument.
Mm-hmm.
But what evidence do they have that Miles knew what he was getting into?
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Miles didn't just sign the agreement once. He signed it twice.
He signed it twice.
Yes. First, back in April 2017, he signed something called an addendum to the residential contract of sale,
Okay.
which specifically reaffirmed his commitment to that HTC agreement.
Oh, wow. So he knew what he was signing.
Yeah, and then get this. He signed another copy of the agreement at the closing on December 27, 2017.
So they made it official.
Yeah, very official. So basically, the plaintiffs are saying that Miles was fully aware of his obligations from the very beginning.
And that he knew that not paying up could land him in some legal trouble.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got our players, the property, the agreement, the dispute. But I'm still wondering, why would Miles refuse to pay knowing the potential consequences?
Right. What was going through his head? Was it greed? Was it a misunderstanding?
Or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And unfortunately, we're missing a crucial piece of the story, Miles's perspective.
We only have one side of the story.
Exactly. And to really understand the situation, we need to see things from his point of view.
We need Miles' side of the story.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have that in these documents.
We don't.
Man, what a cliffhanger. I'm dying to know more. But for now, let's take a little pause.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll dive a little deeper into these historic tax credits.
Sounds good.
They seem to be the key to unlocking this whole case.
Absolutely they are. And what's fascinating about this case is it kind of highlights not just the benefits of these programs, but also the potential pitfalls.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a story that goes way beyond just this one property and these specific players.
I can't wait to unpack that.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a short break. Okay, so we've established kind of the basics of this lawsuit down in Baltimore, but I really want to learn more about these historic tax credits.
Yeah.
They seem to be kind of at the center of everything. Can you tell me a little bit more about how they work and why they're so important?
Absolutely. So imagine you have this beautiful old building full of history and character,
Okay.
but it's falling apart. It would be incredibly expensive to restore, right?
Right.
Well, that's where these historic tax credits come in. They're essentially a way for the government to incentivize people to invest in these properties and kind of bring them back to life.
Oh, that's so cool. So it's like a reward for saving a piece of history.
Yeah, you could say that.
So how do these tax credits actually work?
Think of it as like a financial boost. Developers who restore these historic buildings can actually receive tax credits that reduce their tax burden.
Oh, wow. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
Developers get help with the costs, and we get to preserve these amazing buildings.
Exactly. And these buildings contribute so much to our communities. You know, they really add character and a sense of history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're beautiful, too. It's like a partnership between the government and developers in the community,
It is.
all working together to protect our heritage. But this case kind of highlights that it's not always smooth sailing.
Yeah, not always. It's not always easy.
Right.
There can definitely be some challenges.
So in this case, we have Nicholas Miles, who purchased this property, with the intention of using these HTCs to help finance a renovation.
Right.
And then we have HEBCAC and Eager Street Development, who,
Yeah.
if I'm understanding correctly, acted as a kind of guide or consultant for him.
Yeah, you could think of them as facilitators. They
Yeah.
really have that expertise in navigating these programs, securing the funding and making sure the project meets all the requirements to actually qualify for those tax credits.
So they were providing a pretty valuable service.
They were, which is why the agreement stipulated that Miles would pay them from those HTC proceeds he received.
Right. It was a way to compensate them for their efforts and their expertise.
Right. They were investing their time and resources to help Miles achieve his goal of restoring that property.
But as we know, things didn't quite go according to plan.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
Now, we talked about that default clause earlier, that 15-day window to pay up. It seems pretty strict. What are the implications of having such a tight deadline in these agreements?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem harsh at first glance, but these clauses are really standard in agreements like this.
Okay.
Remember, we're talking about a lot of money here.
Right.
And HEBCAC and Eager Street Development, they were taking a risk by investing in this project. So that default clause was really a way to protect their interests and ensure that everyone was fulfilling their obligations.
So it was a way to guarantee that they'd be compensated for their work, even if something went wrong.
Exactly. It was a way to minimize their risk and ensure that they wouldn't be left, holding the bag.
Right. Okay, so if Miles did breach the contract, as the plaintiffs claim, it seems like they have a pretty strong legal argument.
Yeah.
They could potentially recover not just the original amount, but also interest and legal fees.
Absolutely. The financial repercussions for Miles could be pretty substantial.
Wow.
And that's not even considering the unjust enrichment argument, which adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Okay, so you mentioned unjust enrichment earlier, but I think we need to unpack that a little bit more. Can you give us like a real-world example of how that applies to this case?
Sure. So imagine you and a friend decide to renovate a vintage car.
Okay.
You put in all these hours, you're researching parts, fixing the engine, painting the body. Your friend contributes some money for materials, but you're doing most of the heavy lifting. Then you decide to sell that car, and your friend pockets the entire profit, leaving you with nothing but sore muscles and a toolbox full of greasy wrenches.
That wouldn't be fair at all.
No, it wouldn't. And that's really the essence of unjust enrichment. One party is benefiting unfairly at the expense of another party.
So the plaintiffs are basically saying that Miles is benefiting from all their efforts, their expertise, their financial contributions, without actually holding up his end of the bargain.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, we helped make this happen. We deserve to be compensated.
Right. So they're saying, Miles, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
But here's the thing that I'm still struggling with. Why would Miles refuse to pay in the first place, knowing all these potential consequences?
Right.
It seems like a pretty risky move.
It does. And that's the biggest puzzle in this whole case. We're missing that crucial piece of the story, Miles's perspective.
Right.
Why did he make this decision? Was there some kind of misunderstanding? Did he have financial difficulties, or was there some other reason altogether?
Right. We don't have those answers, unfortunately.
We don't. Not in these documents.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
This case isn't just about this one property or this one agreement, is it?
No, it's not.
It seems like it touches on some broader issues
It does.
related to urban revitalization and historic preservation.
Absolutely. This case, while it's focused on this specific property and agreement, really raises some important questions
Okay.
about the effectiveness of these programs, like the historic tax credit program,
Okay.
the potential for disputes, and the complexities of these public-private partnerships when it comes to urban development.
It's like this one little lawsuit is holding up a mirror to this much larger system.
Exactly.
So how does this case connect to those bigger issues?
Well, think about it. Historic tax credit programs are really designed to revitalize communities, bring economic activity to these often neglected areas, and breathe new life into these historic buildings. But this case shows that there can be challenges,
Right.
potential for conflict, and even unintended consequences.
So are you saying that a case like this could actually discourage people from investing in historic preservation projects?
It's possible.
Yeah.
If developers see this case and think, wow, this seems risky, this seems complicated, they might be hesitant to take on similar projects.
That would be a shame.
It would. Because these programs have so much potential to transform communities.
Yeah, and it also highlights that really delicate balance involved in these public-private partnerships.
It does.
You've got government agencies, developers, community organizations all working together,
Right.
each with their own motivations and goals. And when those goals don't perfectly align or when there's a lack of clear communication, that's when those conflicts can arise.
Exactly. This case is kind of a reminder that transparency, clear agreements, and good communication are really essential for these partnerships to actually succeed.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, these projects are about people
They are.
and their lives,
Absolutely. And you know what happens to the community when a project like this stalls out?
right? What happens if this legal battle drags on and on?
Exactly. That's a critical point. Delays or disruptions in a project like this can really have a ripple effect throughout the whole community.
Wow.
It could impact local businesses, housing availability, and even that overall sense of progress and revitalization.
So this case really does kind of open up this whole can of worms
It does.
about the complexities of urban development, historic preservation, and just the importance of really clear agreements in communication.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. How something that seems so specific, this dispute over this single property, can actually reveal so much about the challenges and opportunities facing our cities.
It really is.
It's like a case study in urban revitalization with all of its complexities and its nuances.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see now how deep this dive really goes.
We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover.
All right, well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a minute and kind of reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay.
What are some key takeaways from this deep dive into the Baltimore lawsuit?
Well, I think first and foremost, this case really underscores the importance of having those clear, comprehensive agreements in any project
Okay.
that involves multiple parties, especially when there are, significant sums of money at stake.
Right.
Those default clauses, while they might seem harsh, they're there for a reason.
Okay.
Everyone involved really needs to understand their obligations and the potential consequences of not meeting those obligations.
It's like a safety net for everyone involved.
Exactly. And it also highlights the importance of seeking expert advice when you're navigating complex programs like the Historic Tax Credit Program.
So for anyone out there who's considering embarking on a similar project, do your research, find a good lawyer, and make sure all the agreements are crystal clear from the very beginning.
Wise words.
No.
Because as this case demonstrates, even the most well-intentioned projects can run into trouble if that groundwork isn't properly laid.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal aspects, the financial risks, the importance of expertise, but I'm also curious about kind of the human element of all of this. What are some of the challenges that can arise in these historic preservation projects beyond just the legal disputes?
That's a great question. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is finding that delicate balance between preserving the historical authenticity of a building
Right.
and meeting modern-day needs and building codes.
Oh, I can imagine. Trying to adapt a building that's, centuries old to meet current safety standards, accessibility requirements, energy efficiency codes. That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It can be. It's a constant balancing act, and it often requires some really creative solutions and sometimes even compromises. And then, of course, there's the ever-present issue of funding.
Right.
These projects are notoriously expensive.
Yeah.
And even with the tax credit, securing enough money to cover all the costs can be a major hurdle.
Plus, you never know what surprises might be lurking behind those old walls.
Exactly. Unforeseen structural issues, hidden hazardous materials, these things can cause significant delays and cost overruns.
Yeah.
And that puts a strain on even the most well-planned projects.
Right. And then there's the impact on the community during the renovation process.
Right.
Construction can be really noisy and disruptive.
It can. And, if it's not handled carefully, it can create tension and frustration among residents.
Absolutely. It's so important to communicate with them and address their concerns and make them feel like they're part of the process.
Absolutely. After all, these projects are ultimately about improving communities.
Right. It's not just about the buildings themselves.
Exactly. It's about people and their lives.
So it's like this delicate dance trying to balance all these competing interests and priorities.
It is.
But when it works, when everyone's on the same page and communication's clear, the results can be amazing.
They can.
Not just for the individual buildings, but for the entire neighborhood.
It's about creating that sense of shared ownership, a sense that everyone benefits from the preservation of these historic treasures.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the legal arguments, the financial complexities, the community impact, and even kind of the human element of historic preservation. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Ooh, I love a good cliffhanger. What is it?
Could this case, with its unique set of circumstances, potentially set a precedent for future disputes that involve historic tax credits? Could it impact how these agreements are structured, how programs are administered, or even how communities approach preservation efforts in the future?
That's a question worth pondering. It'll be interesting to see how this case unfolds and what, if any, lasting impact it has on the world of historic preservation.
Well, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into this fascinating Baltimore lawsuit. We've explored the players, the property, the legal arguments, and even the broader implications for historic preservation. But this is really just the beginning of the conversation. I encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper into these complexities of our world. Until next time, keep those minds curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. You know, this whole situation with the Baltimore lawsuit really got me thinking. We often hear about all those success stories with historic preservation projects.
Right.
But what about the challenges? What are some of the things that can go wrong, even when everyone has the best intentions?
That's a great point. You're right. We don't often hear about those potential pitfalls. And one major challenge, I think, is that delicate dance between preserving historical authenticity
Right.
and meeting those modern-day needs and building codes. Imagine trying to adapt a building that's centuries old
Yeah.
to meet current safety standards, accessibility requirements, energy efficiency codes.
Yeah, that sounds like a logistical nightmare. Trying to preserve those original details while also making the building, functional and safe for modern use.
It is. It's a constant balancing act, and it often requires creative solutions and sometimes even compromises.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the ever-present issue of funding.
Right.
These projects can be incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And even with the tax credits, finding enough financial resources to cover all the costs can be a huge obstacle.
I can imagine. And what about those unexpected surprises that pop up during renovations?
Oh, yeah.
I've seen enough home renovation shows to know that those can really throw a wrench in the works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hidden structural damage, hazardous materials lurking behind walls.
Right.
These unforeseen problems can lead to major delays and cost overruns.
Yeah.
And it puts a strain on even the most carefully planned projects.
Right. And then there's the impact on the community during that renovation process.
Absolutely.
Construction can be disruptive, to say the least.
It can be. It can be really noisy, dusty, all that traffic.
Yeah.
It can take a toll on the residents who live and work nearby.
It's so important to communicate with those residents and address their concerns and make them feel like they're a part of the process.
Absolutely. After all, these projects are meant to benefit the entire community,
Right.
not just the building itself.
It sounds like a lot of plates to keep spinning.
It is.
Balancing historical preservation with those modern needs, securing funding, managing all those unexpected problems, and keeping the community happy.
You got to do it all.
It really makes you appreciate just how much effort and coordination goes into these projects.
It does. And the Baltimore lawsuit, even though we don't know all the details, really underscores those potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that clear communication, strong partnerships, and a shared commitment to the project's goals are absolutely essential for success.
So for anyone out there thinking about tackling a historic renovation project, what are some key takeaways from this deep dive?
Okay, well, first and foremost, I would say do your research. Understand the complexities involved, the regulations, the potential challenges, and the resources that are available to you.
Don't go in blind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second, assemble a strong team.
Okay.
You need experts in historic preservation, architecture, construction law, finance.
Right.
Surrounding yourself with those knowledgeable and experienced people is going to make all the difference.
Like putting together the A-team of historic renovation.
Exactly. And third, pay close attention to the legal aspects.
Okay.
Ensure that all agreements are clear, comprehensive, and protect the interests of all parties involved. Don't be afraid to ask questions and seek legal advice,
Right.
just to make sure you understand everything thoroughly.
Because like we've seen with the Baltimore case, even with the best intentions, things can go really wrong if those legal details aren't ironed out.
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up, this deep dive into the Baltimore lawsuit has been a real eye-opener for
Thanks
me.
for me, too.
It's shown us the power of historic preservation to revitalize communities
Oh, right.
and preserve our heritage. But it's also revealed the potential challenges and pitfalls that can arise.
It's a reminder that these projects aren't just about restoring buildings. They're about building relationships, fostering trust, creating a shared vision for the future.
And as we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. This case, with all its twists and turns, raises a question that extends beyond this one property and these specific players.
Okay.
Could it potentially influence how we approach historic preservation in the future?
That's a great question, and only time will tell what the lasting impact of this case will be.
Right.
But it certainly sparks a conversation about how we can learn from both the successes and the challenges of these historic preservation efforts. It encourages us to think critically about the systems that are in place,
Yeah.
the role of different stakeholders, and the importance of proactive planning and communication.
It's a reminder that historic preservation is an ongoing process,
It is.
a journey that requires constant adaptation, innovation, and a willingness to learn from the past.
And ultimately, it's about finding ways to bridge that gap between our history and our future to create spaces that honor our past while also serving the needs of our present and future generations.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Baltimore lawsuit.
My pleasure.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights into the world of historic preservation and the complexities of urban revitalization.
It's been great exploring this case with you.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming. We'll see you on the next deep dive.